Welcome everyone to today's episode of the Dough Doctor. I'm your host and baking expert, Chef Colette. And if you're watching on the replay or the archive, thank you so much for joining us. Any questions, just message me. Any questions that come up, if you are watching the archive, just shoot me a message and I'll get right back to you. All right, everyone. So for today's show, I have a bunch of questions and some bakes to shout out because we had a beautiful batch of bagels come in. More on that in just a second. And then, but first we're gonna go to our questions, and after questions, I'm gonna demo Pot Sucré, which is part 2 in our series of how to bake beautiful tarts. Hello, Patty. And speaking of Patty, it was Patty's question way back when, several months ago, about tarts and how to really make a good crust, when do you bake it ahead of time, when do you not, all those questions, all those things that really got me started on thinking that we could do tarts as a series. So thank you, Patty, for that. All right, so first to the shout out. From our baker Benelli 9231, we got a gorgeous, gorgeous batch of bagels. And a lovely note, that was a tutorial from a few months back, and our baker went ahead and the bake was beautiful, the texture was beautiful. And one thing, bakers, bagels, making our own bagels, I know I've said this before, but when we make our own bagels, there's nothing like it. There's nothing in the store like it. Everything in the store, especially the supermarket, is gonna taste like cotton balls. So I encourage you to make your own bagels, unless of course you live in New York or Montreal and you have access to a wonderful bagel store in your neighborhood. Then you don't need to, you can focus on other bakes. So, all right, let's get going with our questions. So the first question that came in was about heavy cream and whipping cream. What was the difference? Our baker was in the supermarket, standing in front of all the different types of cream in the dairy section and wondering, what is the difference and when do I choose one over the other? And can I use one? Is it a direct substitution? Okay, so heavy cream, if the recipe calls for heavy cream, I totally encourage you to get heavy cream. But in your area, you may only have whipping cream in your market. The difference is heavy cream is 40% butterfat and whipping cream is 36 to 38% butterfat. Will the whipping cream still whip? Absolutely, but it will take a little bit longer. And the other thing about whipping cream, it's usually packaged as a UHT product, which means it's pasteurized at a higher temperature than regular non-UHT, which extends its shelf life, which again, it might take a little bit longer to whip up. And if you're using it in a ganache, for example, which is a mixture of chocolate and cream that's used as a filling, as a frosting or icing or as a glaze, you may notice a little less richness. I do want to show you, this is not a paid promotion, but I want to show you a product I have found at my local Trader Joe's. Hold on. This is whipping cream, but it's packaged so that it doesn't have to be refrigerated until it's opened. I actually put it in the refrigerator so that I know I have it on hand. It's not quite as rich, but I love the fact that I can have this stuff on hand and I don't have to worry about heavy cream going bad in the refrigerator. Because you know what happens if I have a quart of heavy cream in there? Well, if I don't need it in a recipe, or I've gone ahead and made whatever I need to make with it, I default to one of my favorite things, which is quiche. And with someone who has like borderline cholesterol, I shouldn't be eating quiche. And that's what I do with leftover heavy cream, and it's so delicious. So I digress. I encourage you guys, if you have access to Trader Joe's, try this. It's a great product to have on hand. Again, long-winded to let you know the differences between heavy cream and whipping cream. Both, before you whip them up, should be really, really cold. And hearkening back to those Julia Child days, when you are whipping cream, it's a good idea to chill both the bowl and the whisk or whisk attachment before you start the process. All right, great question. And then this next one, and Benelli, oh great. I see that question, that's awesome. And Cyrus, welcome to all of you. It is great, it's absolutely great to see everybody today. I always look so forward to doing this show. All right, so the question was from one of our bakers, do I have to buy parchment paper, or why can't I just use aluminum foil? Actually, great question. You know, if you have a small kitchen, and I actually do, I mean, this kitchen, it's not as small as the other one, but I don't have as much drawer space. So I can understand this question. Wouldn't it be nice to not have to think about buying another thing like parchment paper? But unfortunately, bakers, we need parchment paper when we bake. Foil is fine for savory dishes. The problem when we line a pan with foil, it's basically like a tanning shield for whatever it is we're baking. So we're gonna have over-browning of bottom and top crust in pans that are lined with foil. Also, foil doesn't break down at all. So probably to be sustainable bakers, if that's one of your baking goals, then probably better to default to parchment paper. Now, parchment paper is coated with a little bit of a silicone coating, food grade silicone coating. I don't want to freak you out. So it takes a little bit longer to break down in the landfill, but it does break down, not like aluminum foil, which never breaks down. But the one problem with aluminum foil in our bakes, just across the board, is it's going to conduct more heat and it's going to brown our product more quickly. Now, that being said, at least a couple times a year when we're talking pies, and could be when we're talking tarts, foil is indispensable when we're trying not to over brown a crust. You know, when we're to the point where maybe that filling, our filling isn't quite set, but our crust is browning, our outer crust is browning, we want to cover that with some foil to prevent it from over browning. So always shiny side down, because the shiny side conducts more heat than the dull side. All right, that's your aluminum foil lesson for today. And we're going to move on to another over browning question. One of our bakers wrote in that their cakes are consistently over browned on the side and on the bottom. The top is beautiful. The cake tests clear. Everything's great. But that bottom and side crust is just, it's a little over caramelized. So my question to the baker was, are you baking your cakes on a baking tray? Are you putting the cake pans on a baking tray before loading the oven? And the answer was no. So bakers, just know that when you're baking cakes, I do this even when I'm baking loaf breads, I always have the pans on a baking tray when they go in the oven. And especially with cakes, if it's supported by a pan, it interrupts that heat, making quick, direct contact. We're creating contact with the bottom of the pan, and that heat rises, right? So if you get the bottom of your cake pan too hot too fast, it goes right to the sides. So that's why the over browning of the bottom and sides of the cake. So just use, I don't have one out, but just make sure that you have a baking tray under your cake pans. All right? So I'm going to take a live question. Oh, wow. Great question. Benelli 9231. She says, I found whole wheat flour in the back of my freezer. How long is it good for? Since it has no fat, it'll last for many years? No, it won't. And actually, it does have fat. So, regular flour, like the one I'm going to use, I'll show you, regular flour right here that we're going to use for our pâte sucrée. Bread flour, all-purpose flour, is not milled from the entire grain. Just think of amber waves of grain, right? You know how it's got the bran on the outside, and the fat comes from the wheat germ, all right? So there is a little 2% fat, not bad fat, the best fat we could actually put in our bodies. But fat does go rancid. So Benelli, if you have really no clear memory of when you bought that whole wheat flour, I would pitch it. Put it in the compost, get rid of it, and buy yourself a fresh bag. You really, in the freezer, whole wheat flour, about 6 months, all right? Then it begins to get a little bit off in flavor. Will it make you sick? No, it's just not going to be optimum. And so that's my answer. Get rid of it. Get rid of it. 6 months in the freezer. Buy small bags if you're not using it, or if you have a co-op or a store nearby that sells bulk, buy it in bulk. Okay, great question. Awesome. Awesome question. Nope, that was the only question. Okay, great. So let's see what else. This one was, I got 2 more, and then we're gonna sail into demo. This one was really interesting, I thought, because it was kind of a food for thought question, no pun intended there. And it came through, not through Instagram, but in my Craftsy class, Danish from Scratch. Because I do answer questions in all my Craftsy classes, and I've told you guys, I actually answered the more challenging baking questions for Craftsy at large. Some of the instructors haven't held on to the answering question portion of Craftsy. So, and I have a Craftsy update for you, so hold on, put a pin in that. Anyway, so this question came over Craftsy, and I thought, you know what? I'm going to share these with my DoughDr bakers, because you might sometimes wonder about this. When we're baking, different categories of items go into the oven chilled, and some of them go in at room temperature, right? When we make a pie crust or cookies, we often chill the dough before we bake it. So the question came in again from the Danish from Scratch class, and one of our bakers last week she put in a comment that she was actually making the dough from that class while watching the show, and that was thrilling, at least for me. So this question, what temperature should Danish and croissant be when they go into the oven? Well, because they have yeast in them and we're proofing them, which means after shaping, we're letting them rise again at room temperature until they lift and puff out and have a slight marshmallow texture. I've just given you the 3 clues for proofing your yeasted doughs right there. 1, 2, 3. The dough, the product goes into the oven at the temperature it was proofed at. So that's the question. Now, in extremely hot weather, and I mean you have to be sitting on the equator, there are some techniques out there for just giving the proofed dough, the proofed croissants or Danish, a little bit of time in the refrigerator. But unless, like I said, you'd have to be really, really searing in order to do that. But that is out there in the internet universe. And I just wanted to mention it because it wouldn't be fair. But in general, under normal conditions, like it's not 140 degrees outside, you're going to bake that product, any yeasted dough product, at that proof temperature right in the oven. Okie dokie? Cool. I thought, like get some wheels turning there. Last question. One of our bakers wrote in, told me she has a brand new oven. Congratulations. And should she use the convection oven, the convection feature for her macarons? I advise try it. So if you have a convection setting on your oven, if you have a countertop oven that has a convection setting, it's great to bake with a convection setting. The forced air usually bakes our product, the forced hot air, a little bit faster, and it can really help with a beautiful crust and caramelization of the crust. But it's hit or miss for macarons. It kind of depends on the oven. So I suggested, normally a macaron recipe will give you 2 trays. Bake 1 with the convection setting, reducing the temperature to 300 degrees, because bakers, when we bake with convection, we want to reduce the temperature 25 degrees. You're also, because the forced air blows the heat toward the door, you're going to want to rotate the pan about 3/4 of the way through the macaron bake, all right? So in a regular conventional oven, we don't always have to rotate product unless you have a hot spot in your oven. But in a convection oven, often we have to. But the problem with macarons, like a souffle or a cake leavened by steam, we don't want to open the oven door until the foot has formed. And that's about 8 minutes in. So that's my recommendation. Give it a try. 1 tray at the convection setting, 25 degrees less, and then try a tray without the convection setting at 325, which is the recommended temperature for macarons. All right, so got some macarons in there, always, right? And then also tell us what you're baking. I'm so sorry, you guys, I just jumped right in, but let us know what you're baking this weekend and what you're doing for Mother's Day, and what's on your list if you're a mom and you've asked for something special. And so yeah, let's go. Okay, so that's it for questions. And we are going to move on to our second dough, which is pâte sucrée. And pâte sucrée is French for sugar paste. And this one is made with the creaming method. So I have the mixer right here, fitted with the paddle attachment, literally right off camera. And this is also a lesson in creaming method, which I swear to God, I could talk about for hours, maybe as long as I could talk about yeast, but it would be they would be close. But here's the thing. When we make cookies, and doughs with creaming method, we do not want to take them to light and fluffy. Light and fluffy, where we're creaming away for 8 or 10 minutes, that is not for cookies and doughs. We don't want to whip that much air into them. So on average, we're just mixing at medium speed for about 2 minutes, okay? So your next question, because I can hear you bakers, your next question is, well, chef, do I soften the butter? Yes and no. So you want the butter to be cool, but not softened. I literally took this out of the refrigerator at 10 minutes before starting our live. So it's been sitting out about 25 minutes. It's still cool to the back of my hand. So we don't want it to sit out for hours like we do for some things. And remember, bakers, we're going into the warmer months, so watch how long you're softening your butter. If our butter gets too soft to the point where it's shiny, you all know this, we've talked about this before, then you're gonna have to start over. Because if it's shiny and super soft, it's gone too far, okay? All right, the paddle attachment's designed to work at medium speed, medium high speed at the most. So we're gonna watch our speeds here. The first thing that's gonna happen is the butter is gonna go into the mixer, and because it's not super softened, because I want it to be malleable, but I don't want it to be super soft. So the first thing I'm gonna do on low speed, just break it up, like about 15 seconds. All we're doing this week is making our dough and throwing it into the freezer for next week. If you go back to Wednesday's post, you'll see the ingredient amounts, and I'll have the recipe and more details on the website Monday. Now I'm adding the sugar and the vanilla. Remember, we've talked about, I know I told you the whole story about why we add vanilla with creaming method with the fat and the sugar, so that our product is just better. Because we're creating air pockets with the sugar, and if we add the vanilla now, not with the eggs, then that delicate vanilla flavor can permeate the fat and the sugar, spread that flavor throughout before it has to fight the eggs. You know, the eggs are like a tsunami as far as this dough is concerned. As far as the vanilla is concerned, the vanilla doesn't stand a chance. Any questions about that? Put them in the comments. I have the Barbie glitter spatula right here. That's what I call it. Let it mix for about 30 seconds and then scrape down. The other thing is to make sure to scrape the paddle, because any under-creamed butter and sugar is going to it's going to look like acne on your dough. I'm just going to say it. I'm just going to be blunt. It's going to look like a little pock mark on your dough if you don't mix it in properly. There. Okay, now I want this to retain its bright yellow color. I'm at medium speed, so we're gonna let that go for about a minute, minute and a half. And the rest of the ingredients, the flour is sifted over here with a little bit of salt. And then I have an egg, and I have 2 egg yolks. I love this recipe. I just turned the mixer off. There's no guessing with liquid like there is for pie dough, which is such a blessing. Though the pie dough we've been doing here on the show does not have you guess. I think any recipe that has that as the variable is not successful. All right, now watch. Before we go back, I wanted you to see this. I didn't do it ahead. This is important with creaming method. This is something else I learned from Chef Albert. When you have a whole egg, break up that yolk. Remember I told you one of my mentors was the best baker of the last century? Seems weird to say that, but I guess it's true. Okay, so that's it. I just mixed the yolk up with the egg whites so that when we're adding them to the butter and sugar, we have fat meeting fat without that water being so prevalent, because that would break, that could potentially break that. And if the eggs were too cold, which they weren't, could break our mixture. What does breaking mean? Looks curdled, like cottage cheese. Can we fix it? Oh yeah, we can fix anything, but it's just one more thing. So let me show you this. Can you see how it is yellow, bright yellow? Have to apologize. I am just now really mastering the eye line of my brand new spanky iPad. So you want it to stay yellow just like it was when you unwrapped it, okay, and chopped it up a little bit. All right, I'm gonna mix for just a few more seconds, then we're gonna add the butter. Okay, now, sometimes you see people add the eggs with the mixer running, but creaming method has not stopped until the eggs are in, and I don't always want to keep creating bigger holes. So I'm going to stop the mixer and add the eggs and then mix. That was half the eggs. This is the dough that's so awesome for sugar cookies. And I posted some pictures of sugar cookies on Wednesday. You know, royal icing, super beautiful, lovely piping. This is the cookie. Okay, all right. Now I'm gonna add the rest of the egg. Scrape your bowls because you need all the product. I didn't get all the product. Okay. I'm on medium speed. I did sip my flour because it is just the right thing to do. I don't want my pastry to be dense. The only time we don't have to, if you're pressed for time, you can whisk. The sifting police will not be at your door, I promise you. But if you have a second, it's a best baking practice. There we go. We've named it, a best baking practice. So I'm mixing this for about a minute just so it comes together. It does not have to be perfect because we're going to dump all this flour in. Show you what that looks like. As a matter of fact, it isn't. It looks a little bit, there you go. See, bright yellow from the egg yolk. I think my eggs were a little bit cold because it's a little bit, not curdled, but it doesn't look like, it's not super smooth, but it's fine. I'm gonna add the flour all at once, and then I'm gonna mix on low speed just until the flour disappears. And you might have to pulse it if it starts to fly out. So the mixer doesn't really like to be pulsed, but it doesn't hurt it. The motors are very, very sturdy. Now, if you pulsed it for 8 hours a day, you would wear out the motor, but not. We're gonna make next week a really gorgeous chocolate ganache tart with this dough. And so I will be providing that rest of the components of the tart in Wednesday's post. In Wednesday's post. And you could add the flour if it makes you nervous to add it all at once. You could add it in 2 increments, or this mixer is a 4.5 quart bowl. If you have a smaller mixer, then you can add the flour by hand. We just don't want to over mix. So you can see I'm going at it by hand. As a matter of fact, I'm going to use a bowl scraper. And I'm gonna really get in there, scrape down the side of the bowl. This is a great technique for you guys to learn to master this dough. I'm gonna tell you something shocking. Most pastry shops buy this already made and baked because it can be a little bit labor intensive. But not for us. Okay, now the next thing that's gonna happen, you're gonna grab your plastic wrap and you're gonna dump it onto the center of your plastic wrap. And we're gonna do a check we're gonna do a little troubleshooting, and then I'm gonna let you go back to your day and your Mother's Day weekend. Okay, so let's take a look here, bakers. Look at this, all right? So this is a good mix. All the flour has disappeared, and I don't have any bit of egg yolk or egg on the surface. If I did, I'd plop it down, I would take the heel of my hand, and I would just mash it into the dough, just like that. That technique has a French name because doesn't everything have a French name? It's called fraisage. So sexy, oh my God. I have a plug and then I'll let you go. I believe it's on Hulu. It is a show called Ottolenghi, the great London chef who has all those wonderful books, and The Cakes of Versailles. It's a documentary about his work with a group of pastry chefs making an exhibit of making beautiful pastries to match an exhibit at the Metropolitan Museum in New York that were artifacts, paintings, costumes, beautiful, just gorgeous things from the Palace of Versailles. It was very inspiring. I know if you watch it, you will want to jump up and start baking. All right, my bakers, so that's it for today. Your homework for this week is to make your pâte sucrée. You're gonna wrap it in plastic wrap. I want you to pat it out about a 1/2 inch thick. It could be a little thicker, but not a big ball of dough. We want to avoid big balls of dough across the board. And then slide this into a Ziploc bag, label it, maybe you have your marker in the kitchen, label it, put the date on it. I know we're gonna use it next week, but I highly recommend, we were talking about Benelli's whole wheat flour. It's not a bad idea unless you're going through product lickety split, write the date that you opened it, and then you'll know. That's what professional chefs do, because we can't keep all this stuff in our heads, right? Anyway, So those are your tips and techniques for this week. I'll see you right back here at the same time, same channel next week, and we will take our beautiful dough. We'll cover fully baking it before filling it with our gorgeous chocolate ganache filling. All right, you guys, happy Mother's Day, mwah, to all my moms out there. And yeah, to everybody, have a beautiful May weekend. I hope it's gorgeous weather wherever you are. Thanks for joining me. Happy baking. Bye.